moved back to our final round of paper speakers. Our final speaker in proposition of the motion is Nick Davis. Nick is an MPhil student reading world history at Girton College. He was president of the Cambridge Union in Lent 2024 when he was an undergraduate student reading human, social and political sciences at Homerton College. Nick, you have the ears of the house. Thank you.
Under extraordinary circumstances, military intervention can be justified. This is not the question before us tonight. The question is to whether military intervention in the Middle East on the historical record is something we should regret. And our action has been an abject, unforgivable, consistent failure. Just to reiterate the headline statistics, in Iraq, 10 years into our invasion, 270,000 dead, 2 civil wars in the space of 10 years. Libya, 2 years after our intervention, civil war, 150,000 displaced to this day, no functioning central government. If this is what success looks like to you, I fear for what your definition of failure is. Our more indirect forms of intervention, Gaza, 53,000 Palestinians dead, perhaps up to 180,000 according to the Lancet Medical Journal. We need to be honest. At this point, the opposition may accuse us of being hypocrites, which has been the implicit tone in the debate thus far, that whilst we denounce innocents killed, we're the ones who would endorse sitting by and letting dictators massacre with impunity. This is the charge before us, and this is the charge we need to face squarely. Yes, I supported the institution of a no-fly zone in 1991 to prevent Saddam Hussein engaging in his brutal attacks on the Kurdish people in the north of Iraq. But that was overshadowed by the crippling sanctions the West imposed and the brutal invasion that occurred in 2003. Yes, I do accept that it was right to institute the no-fly zone over Libya, specifically Benghazi in 2011, to prevent Gaddafi's troops from murdering there. But that was overshadowed by the fact we went far beyond what was authorised under UN Resolution 1973 and then toppled Gaddafi's regime without a scintilla of support for reconstruction. So you can't cherry-pick the isolated moments of intervention and ignore the rest. This debate isn't about those moments of intervention that you wish would have happened. This isn't a build-your-own fantasy counterfactual. And the opposition who indulge in it sound an awful lot to me like old-style Soviet communists. That, oh, this intervention didn't work this time, it didn't work that time, it didn't work here, it didn't work there, but somehow, within the annals of theory, unrevealed to us by history, the principle of it remains untouched. You would make the most adherent and coherent defenders of Soviet communism in your incoherence. So the irony is that when we intervene, we end up mirroring a lot of the features of the regimes we seek to overthrow. Now, I'm an Iraq specialist, so I'm going to talk about Iraq. When we invaded Iraq, we instituted an American viceroy who had absolute dictatorial control. His way of governing Iraq was to round up 10,000 Iraqis without trial and imprison them. We outsourced the reconstruction of Iraq, 72% of it to American corporations who sucked the country dry of capital. Just to give you an illustration of how ruinous this was, let's take water. 60% of Iraqis had access to drinkable water on a regular basis before the invasion. That fell to 40% within 18 months. That was large in part because we outsourced it to a company called Bechtel, which profited massively from it. So we need to be honest that when we demand democracy from Iraq, after we instituted the conditions for a corrupt and kleptocratic state, we shouldn't be surprised it was as much of a disaster as it was because we made it so. And this is something which has distinct links in terms of a hostility of the West towards democratic and accountable institutions that we can trace in the recent age all the way back to the fact that a CIA coup overthrew Iran's only elected leader, Mohammad Mossadegh, in 1953, a decision with ruinous consequences to this day. So I agree with Tal and Dr. Kettle that to know massacre is happening and to look away is unforgivable. But what's more unforgivable is to put yourself in the position where you remove one set of killers and create the conditions that they thrived in. This is the reality of Iraq, and it is the reality of Libya. France aided the removal of Colonel Gaddafi, and a few years later ended up backing a little-known figure called Khalifa Haftar. Does it ring any bells? Khalifa Haftar? Anyone? This bloke's a real beauty. His forces dumped bodies in mass graves, launched repeated assaults against the internationally recognised capital of Libya, Tripoli, and the UN-backed government there, and he keeps company with such delightful groups such as Putin's Wagner. Stories like this really convince you the West went in for the right reasons in the first place, don't they? We arm more men with guns to ethnically cleanse and repress than we arm to stop such horrors. This hammers home a truth, that we're more responsible for the deaths we enable than the deaths we fail to prevent in a hypothetical intervention. This is an elementary logic of moral responsibility. And it's time to nail another lie of the night. The people who say, look, we can accept the Middle East is a tough neighbourhood, and we can accept the fact that we can't bring human rights there, but at least we bring stability. And stability is of utility in and of itself. To me, this seems a bizarre argument of a particular flavour of delusion. We've had a lot of kind words said about Saudi Arabia this evening and their stabilising influence. Well, let me give you the example of Yemen. We, to the tune of tens of billions of dollars, funded a Saudi air war in Yemen, which led to the deaths of 340,000 people and blockaded the entire Yemen, and it blockaded part of the peninsula. And what did we get from it? The Houthis still control large swathes of Yemen. They're still able to disrupt large amounts of shipping in the Red Sea, as we've seen in the past 18 months. Moral catastrophe did not beget strategic victory. And more than that, what have the Saudis given us in return for the support that we've given them? They cut oil production in order to hike up energy prices and undermine our sanctions against Russia, doing so repeatedly. Their private charities fund Salafi extremism across the world. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is not a reliable ally, it is a rogue actor. And on that point, that brings me to perhaps the elephant in the room tonight, which is Gaza. We have given Netanyahu a blank check to take land in Syria, invade Lebanon, proclaim he'll conquer the Gaza Strip, now he's razed it to the ground in a genocidal assault. I don't know in what universe this looks like stability to you. To me, it looks like a region driven to the brink of all-out war and catastrophe. Ooh. Some in the foreign policy establishment say this wanton carnage can be justified because it weakens Iranian influence. And if you're worried about Iranian influence, you should fear Western intervention the most, because the biggest boon to Iranian influence in the 21st century was the occupation of Iraq itself. And let me explain this to you. Has anyone got a mic, by the way? A handheld? Cheers for that. The occupation of Iraq. And I'll tell you this. When we invaded Iraq, we empowered a corrupt, petty, and authoritarian man called Nouri al-Maliki. We helped him ascend to the top of Iraqi politics in 2006. Then the Obama administration kept him in power in 2010, even though he did not win an election. He told us he would extend the status of forces agreement, which would allow American troops to stay in Iraq. He told us he would reject Iranian influence, but what he did was integrate Iran's most favored militiamen into being the key players of government, all the whilst, as my side have well documented, enabling the rise of ISIS, alienating Sunni politicians, and locking up people in mass arrests. If that sounds familiar, that's precisely because that's how we governed Iraq in 2003. So one last thing I want to say is this. We should not enhance reckless elites. Jonathan isn't the first gullible American to be taken advantage of by the wrong set of elites, by the way, and he's not going to be the last if this record's anything to go by. The final point is,
that when we mitigate the problems we created, we call them a startling success. And this is distinctly in relation to ISIS. So just to be resolutely and absolutely clear, it was right to take action against ISIS to liberate Mosul, Raqqa, Sabatra, and those other pockets of Libya, Syria, and Iraq which were taken over. But as has been well pointed out, we can hardly pat ourselves on the back when we sparked the rise of ISIS's insurgency. If an arsonist sets a house ablaze and then douses water on the building out of guilt, does that mean he should cease to regret his initial decision? So to conclude, brutality has become the very air we breathe in the Middle East. So much so we fail to even notice it. And demanding regret is a demand for accountability where we've seen none. Regret is not passive inaction. It is a demand to act better. And what I would say to you is this, to close it, is that we want to vote in this chamber for tonight for a motion that will enable us not to repeat the horrific mistakes of the past. If we bury our heads in the sand and pretend our approach is not broken, the darkest visions of catastrophe in the Middle East will continue to come to pass, not because we failed to prevent them, but because we made them so. Thank you.